And here in the Congregational Church records, I found a letter of transfer from her church in Connecticut to this church, actually not before it united with this church, Thorn Grove congregation, stating that she was good to join without having to take any classes or anything like that. And if you read the envelope, it says Mrs. Elmira Gaines, care of Mr. Samuel Gaines, Thorn Grove, Will County, Illinois. So if you're looking in the old records and you want to find Crete people prior to 1849, the start of Crete, you'll be looking for the two groves that existed here, Thorn Grove and Beebe's Grove, or Thorn Creek Precinct. This certifies that Elmira, wife of Samuel Gaines, is a member of the First Congregational Church in Middletown, Connecticut, in good standing, and that her own request recommended to the fellowship of the Congregational Church in Thorn Grove, Illinois, and that when shall be received there, her particular relation to this church will cease. Signed by the pastor John Crane, September 2nd, 1847. This is Walter and Susan, who would be Walter is their son. And Walter's brother Horatio is who I'm descended from. He's buried in Adams Cemetery. And that's it for Samuel.
Orange then? Okay. Okay, we're going to go over here to talk about Charles Horn. Charles Horn was originally born in Germany in 1828. When he was 20 years old, he came to this country. He worked in New York for a few years, then he came to Chicago and worked as a grocer in Chicago. Worked in the grocery business, I should say. He married a gal named Frederica Doscher, and they moved out here to Endor. Endor is a settlement east of town, almost Indiana, off Exchange Street. They lived there for a few years. He was the postmaster in Endor from 1861 to 1874. They had 3 children. His first son was born when he was in Endor. It was Charles H. Horn. Then they moved to, he bought a piece of property in Crete in 1870. That's the property just north of the Methodist Church. There's a house with a fence around it on the northeast corner of North Street and Chicago Road. He bought 5 acres for $900 in 1870. And by 1874 he moved from Endor to Crete, and then I imagine they built that house there. He opened a grain business, grain flour and feed business in Crete. Ran that for a few years. Then he ended up and had health problems, and he passed away. He was 60 when he passed. Died in 1888. His son, Charles H., had helped him with the business, so Charles H. continued on with it. Charles H. had a problem. The business ended up having a problem, and they ended up going bankrupt. And after bankruptcy, Charles H. got a job in Chicago working at the post office, the main post office, and commuted every day. So Charles H. was commuting on the train, coming back home, and there was some construction people working on the tracks, and somebody moved a switch, and the train from St. Louis was going north, and this commuter train coming south, and they collided and killed Charles H. Horn. He was one of the 3 men killed, 16 injured. So left his wife with 8 children, all under the age of 16, with no assistance. Fortunately, she did get a settlement from the railroad eventually. But the house that Charles Horn Sr. had built over on North and Main ended up, his daughter Hager, Joe Hager's wife, had lived there, and she donated that to the library, probably back in the 70s. And the library had it for a few years. The idea originally was to build a new library there, but they decided there was not going to be enough room for parking and everything, so they ended up selling the house. And that's the original Horn House. It became the Hager House.
And he was our first mayor.
And that, yeah.
First mayor of Crete.
The first mayor in 1980, or 1880, I'm sorry. 1880, they formed a village board, or village of trustees, and he was the first technically president, which they call him the mayor, but he was the first president of the village of Crete.
Okay, thank you.
Tim.
Phyllis, you're up next with Moses Cook.
Moses, yeah. Cook.
She's not Mrs. Cook.
Where is the... As you're walking down this way, you'll see the Muirhead, we have the Muirhead farm, and the Muirhead farm is the place where the Cooks hid the slaves in their basement. And so the Cooks, Hannah and the Cooks did, and Moses Cook, we are going to put another application into the National Park Service to get the 3 places where the 3 farm families hid the slaves and then transferred them at night to the next place, lots of times Crown Point or going north to Chicago. And so the Cooks was one of the farm families, and it's on Richton Road, and it has now been the family farm of the Muirheads for several generations. And we have Bill Muirhead standing. Hi, yeah, he's a foot taller than I am. And it's still a wonderful farm, and the Spences, your great-grandfather or something built that home, and so the log cabin is gone, unfortunately, but it is still a very special place, one of our great farm families here in Crete. So we are hoping to get the 3 places that the 3 farm families that hid the slaves to be certified to be on the Underground Railroad too. So that will come next.
Again, I'm just going to read what Ray Piepenbrink said in his cemetery tour about Adam Brown. Now, if you've never heard of Brown's Corner, you haven't lived in the area very long. Brown's Corner was located in the northwest corner of the intersection of Dixie Highway, Chicago Road, and Sauk Trail in South Chicago Heights. You're probably more acquainted if I tell you that the Burger King in South Chicago Heights is generally the area of Brown's Corner. This was the site of the first permanent white settler in this entire territory. Adam Brown built his log cabin and laid his claim on this corner in 1833. His daughter Livonia was the first white child born in this area. Brown's Corner at this intersection had been called for many, many years, was at one time the State and Madison Street of the south suburbs. And I'm talking about the time when covered wagons and farm wagons and so forth went through. Okay, where's Chuck at? Chuck's gonna talk about the Coles and the Kesters.
My name is Chuck Eckel. I'm relatively new to the Crete Area Historical Society, so that means I apologize. I will be reading most of this information. Like several of these people here, I'm a short timer. I've only lived in Crete about 45 years. So the history surrounding burial plots that are numbered 54 through and 59 deal with the Cole and Kester family. The Red House on Main Street, which is just south of the library, may be the oldest home in Crete. John and Martha Cole bought it in 1847. The deed states that the price was $100, but family history indicates that they paid $50 and also gave the seller a buggy, an old horse, and a harness. John Cole opened his blacksmith and wagon shop just south of their home on Main Street. John Wesley Cole, his son, joined the Union Army to fight in the Civil War in 1861 at the age of 18. He was a member of Company F, 8th Regiment of the Illinois Cavalry, and on July 24th in 1862, he was at a camp in Virginia and wrote his sister the following note, quote, "The soldiers had 7 days of terrible fighting by day and marching by night, sleeping in the mud and living on hard bread alone. The falling back of McClellan's army from Richmond was altogether an unexpected move," unquote. John Wesley Cole's last letter to his mother was dated July 3rd, 1863, from Westminster, Maryland, 2 days after the Battle of Gettysburg had begun. Quote, "Our brigade had the honor of opening the great Battle of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, commencing on the first day of July. The next morning, we left for this place. The battle has been raging since with fury. Yesterday, a horse ran over me and hurt my head. It feels all right today. I expect the rebels will get used up so bad that they will never cross the Potomac in force. Fighting seems to be going on everywhere," unquote. John Wesley Cole was mortally wounded at Falling Waters, Maryland, in a skirmish with Southern troops on July 14, 1863. Although his name is on this gravestone, he is buried in the National Cemetery at Antietam, Maryland.
Yeah,
Point that out, so
yeah,
because I'm not familiar.
it's up there a little ways because this is the Kester. We just moved
Okay,
over
we
to
just,
the-
well, I went by the flag.
That's
Okay.
all right. That's right.
Yeah, I told you, I didn't know this area that well.
Yeah, the one who died in the Civil War is right there.
It's right there.
Oh.
Okay, Jane, okay, there it is. That's
Yeah.
nice and neat. Okay, on to with the Kester family. John and Martha Cole's granddaughter, Charlotte, who was the third generation to live in the family home, married Omer Kester, and his grave is right there, in 1916. Their son George Kester and his wife Lucille moved there when they married and then raised their 4 children, which would have been the 5th generation in the family home on Main Street. In 1936, the Will County Centennial Committee placed a special monument in front of the Kester home in recognition of the importance of Gordon Hubbard's trail to the development of Illinois. It's still there and says, "Side of Gordon Hubbard Trail, Chicago to Danville, 1820. George Kester really enjoyed steam engines that were used to power the farm equipment of the early part of the 20th century. His 2 sons now continue to enjoy that hobby. For many years, George mowed and maintained the cemetery, and now his son, Robert Kester, is the president of the Crete Cemetery Association. George's grandson, Bobby Kester, is in the process of earning his Eagle Scout badge and a bronze sign made describing the history of the cemetery. He also formed a committee to clean up and raise the old gravestones. That bronze sign is close to where we were, right by that fence, right near the edge of the cemetery in the middle. Thank you. Okay, I might add just a note here. The Kester family, like Chuck said, is on the red house right on Main Street just south of the library. On Labor Day weekend, if you were in town here on that Saturday, you might have heard the steam whistle blowing. It kind of called to me, so I had to go over there for a while. We're not going to walk down to some of these other grave sites here, but if you notice, there's a gray stone down there with a star on it. That's Mr. DeJarnett, buried there. He was a publisher of the local Crete newspaper at the time. He was a Confederate soldier. So you see the star there. So he was an upstanding citizen after those hostilities were over. So that's his grave over there. We have Dashers. I want to say they're right over here. They were out in the indoor area. That's out on Exchange Street by Clemmy Road. There's the fire station out there. Dashers had a huge sawmill there. There's some pictures there of trees that they were cutting that were probably 5 or 6 feet in diameter. They were just enormous trees. They later moved that sawmill over to where the park is, just south of the tennis court. They had a sawmill building that they had moved over, and they moved that there in 1900 or 1899, something like that. A Mr. Dasher that lived in Crete here was an avid photographer and took a lot of pictures here in Crete. And a lot of the pictures that you see in any of these old history books of Crete, the recent ones here, Crete Remembered also, were pictures that Mr. Dasher took in Crete at the turn of the century when the roads were still dirt. And so he handed those glass plate negatives, which I still have, the Historical Society has, over to my dad, who was a budding photographer in the 40s and 50s. And so my dad always took those pictures, made copies, displayed them around the stores in town, gave talks at the schools and everything. So that guy really preserved something that's priceless for us here in Crete. The library put some effort into getting a grant to copy those pictures, and I think they're on a website there somewhere with the library. But Ryan, in the last several years, he's put is that a Facebook site? A Facebook site called Crete Township Pictures Remembered.
No, not really.
Oh, Crete Township Pictures. I didn't remember that. That's quite right. So, anyhow, if anybody is interested in seeing what those pictures look like and virtually anything else, he's been going through that collection of negatives, the glass ones and the vinyl ones and everything else. How many documents have you put on that site?
Only a little over 4,000.
4,000?
I don't know if there's another small town in America that freely shared. And
you better believe it. Crete Township Pictures, it's photographs, it's documents, it's videos, you name it. There's just, you could spend a year watching all that stuff. So people had the presence of mind to record and preserve these documents for us today and for the future. One other family that's over where Bill's walking there is the Tillotson family. They had a grocery store that they ran in town here. It's right where the old pharmacy is, if you remember that. Now it's a health center just a block south of the traffic light. They were a business in town here. And Bob Bruns isn't here right now, but Hiram Tillotson was a young fellow in Crete and was going to school in Chicago. One day he came home from school, and him and his buddies, they decided they'd go out to the Faithorn Reservoir. And now, Faithorn doesn't even hardly exist anymore except in all our memories. Faithorn was a huge railroad yard out east of Crete and south of Burville Road. Faithorn Road they call it too. Huge railroad yard. There was one line coming into the railroad yard and a whole bunch of roundhouses, and they switched trains and built trains out there. They had a reservoir because all the trains ran on steam. And so all the engines would have to get water to make steam to make the engines run. So they had a reservoir out there. It's still there. And Hiram and his friends went out there, and it must have been a hot day, and he drowned. So that Tillotson family, you'll see stones throughout the cemetery for them as well.
Now we're going to go to the Cooper, right?
Yep.
Or going back a little bit.
Okay, maybe as a memorial to
Civil War veterans that are buried here. We'll read a list here when we get at the end here.
Yeah.
Okay, Ryan's going to talk about Mary Cooper. Got an interesting story here.
He was part of that going north to Richton Road and into Staker.
Yeah, I've got some old glass nuggets.
Okay, earlier I was talking about my fourth great grandfather, Samuel Ward Gaines. This is his first cousin, Samuel Ward Cooper. They like to use the middle name of Ward, I think because there was a Ward in the family who was a prominent state senator back in the 1800s. So this is an excerpt from the History of Will County, 1878. Of these old pioneers, only 2 still remain. The rest are all gone to other parts or have departed to that bourne from which no traveler returns. Samuel Ward Cooper still resides on the old place. Now, if everybody knows where Speedway is in University Park on the corner of Western and Exchange, that was originally called Cooper's Corner because that's where he lived. He has from the first been ranked as one of the soundest men in the township, and as such has enjoyed the respect and confidence of his fellow citizens to an unlimited degree. He was the first supervisor of the township when the 2 townships, now denominated Money and Will, were a single precinct and were known as Cary. Samuel Ward Gaines is the other survivor. Whatever can be said of a man of good reputation also attaches to his name. He has accumulated a handsome property and now enjoys the fruits of his hard toil and early hardships incident to a pioneer life. And this is Mary Cooper, Samuel Ward Cooper's daughter. She was a teacher at the Schrage Schoolhouse where the Effman Hall is today, on the corner of Kings Road and Exchange. I will read first what Ray Piepenbrink said in his cemetery walk. It says December 2nd, 1850 through April 8th, 1915, a teacher. She was a school teacher in the Schrage School District. The original school burned down. This is a replacement. Actually, half of it is the original Zion schoolhouse that they moved over there. In 1904, her salary was $38 a month. Today, we make that in half a day. Mary Cooper was a big woman, and some of her teachings including using her muscle on some of the 17 or 18-year-old 8th graders. Those big farm boys, and my uncle tells me that there were many a fight in school, so school fights are nothing new. In fact, there might have been more of them back then. They wouldn't do what she said, and she'd be off after them. And they'd be running, and the desk would be tipped over, and the stovepipe would be knocked over. So they had quite a time there. Back when she taught, a teacher's certificate wasn't issued. The only requirements were that the teacher knew more than the student. Okay, while going through my family's belongings, I'm lucky that Ferris Gaines' house is still in the family on the corner of Lincoln and 2nd Street. I found a letter from Mary Cooper explaining how Crete got its name. I shared this letter with Howard Piepenbrink, who writes a quarterly newsletter about the German immigrants to Crete Township. If you've never read his newsletter and you're interested in the German immigrants to this area, you got to really check out. It's spelled the Landsman, but it's pronounced Lundsman. It's available for free at the library. And this is his article based on her letter. Based on post office records in Washington, D.C., the Crete, Illinois post office was actually established by the federal government in 1838. and true to the times, it would be located in the homes of the postmasters, the first being that of Henry Bell, a resident of Cook County in what would later become Rich Township. In an article written for Ferris Gaines of Crete and sent to Mr. Gaines in 1915, Mary Cooper, the daughter of Samuel Cooper, an early settler, 1835, in the northeast corner of what would become Monee Township, Miss Cooper advised Mr. Gaines, quote, "Father got his mail first at Chicago, then Joliet, and then Thornton. They sent a petition for a post office to be called Thorn Grove, but there was one by that name, and they had to select another. Old Mr. Bell on the Batchelder farm." So we're now going back to the Batchelders. Remember, Batchelders lived kitty corner from the Bells, up by Western and Sauk Trail. Old Mr. Bell on the Batchelder farm said he'd find one they hadn't got and took his Bible and selected Crete. It was in Cook County at first. Can you imagine Crete being in Cook County? Then at Dr. Horatio Hitchcock's, who was also Crete's first doctor. Mr. Bell served the Crete Name Post Office as its postmaster from February 13, 1838 until he was replaced on March 26, 1839 by Dr. Joseph Batchelder of the same location. It was not until April 15, 1840 when Dr. Horatio Hitchcock was appointed its postmaster that the Crete Post Office moved to Will County, where Dr. Hitchcock then resided. I looked in old records and I believe Hitchcock lived just south of Scott's Tires on Route 1. Federal post offices had little, if any, regard to county boundaries. The same holds true in many jurisdictions to this day. Meanwhile, it was 1836, soon after Will County had been carved out of Cook and Iroquois counties, that a Vermont native, Willard Wood, and his wife Diantha had moved to eastern Will County. Civic-minded in every respect, the couple prospered, and in 1843, Mr. Wood, a staunch Democrat and an attorney by training, was admitted to the Illinois bar. A year later, recognizing Mr. Wood's credentials and achievements, the Honorable John Wentworth, then a Democrat member of the U.S. House of Representatives from Illinois, was instrumental in the appointment of Willard Wood as the fourth postmaster of the Crete Post Office. Crete was a post office before it was a town. Serving as postmaster from his home, Mr. Wood would hold that position until he was replaced by Orrin Kyle on July 24, 1849. In that year, 1849, Mr. Wood laid out a town site, naming the place Crete, taking its name from the post office of which he was the postmaster. No longer would the name be solely associated with a roaming post office. Thanks to Mr. Wood, it had now become a place name. Mr. Wood has ever since been rightfully recognized as the founder of Crete, Illinois. 1 year later, 1850, Crete Township was also established. Ultimately, in 1880, the village of Crete was incorporated. Landsman is indebted to Ryan Martin of Crete, a descendant of Ferris Gaines, for sharing Miss Cooper's original article, which in turn has led to the earliest history of the Crete Post Office and a better understanding of how Crete became a place name. And I found this while doing research on place names this is from a book called Place Names of Illinois by Edward Callery. It says, post offices moved frequently and many were discontinued and reestablished on several occasions. So it should not be assumed that a post office with the name of a given community originated in that community. And then while going through Tim's stuff, I find the dedication program to the new Crete Post Office, the one that currently exists. And you can see that they knew that Crete was first established in Cook County, but the historians didn't have a clue. It says, Crete, Will County, Illinois, established in Cook County on February 13th, 1838. And this is neat. You can, when you go home, go to the United States Postal Service website or just Google USPS Postmaster Finder tool. They have a Postmaster Finder tool. You just type in the town and it'll tell you all the postmasters that served for that post office. And sure enough, when you type in Crete in the United States Postal Service website, it says originally established in Cook County, 1838. Henry Bell, first postmaster. Joseph Batchelder, second postmaster. Then it shows it changed to Will County when Horatio Hitchcock became third postmaster. And then finally Willard Wood became the fourth postmaster, which he then, of course, took the name of the post office as the name of his newly formed town in 1849.
Okay, I think we've got one more site to visit.
Right.
And we're going to go over here to the Safford family. While we're walking over there, that came a hard pill to swallow about finding out how Crete truly got its name. We always thought it was Willard Wood pulling it out of the Bible, but
Next time you drive through Western and Talk Trail, just think of the early Crete post office.
That's right here. Joseph Safford. Yes, he's right coming on.
while we've got a second here, you know, there's those out there that are accused of trying to change history. We corrected it. We didn't change it. We corrected it. So, anyhow, we'll turn this over to Waylon Freebold. He's going to tell us about the Safford family.
Yeah, I'm listed as Carol Freebold, but she's my sister and she's the historian, not me. Buried here are the early pioneers of the Safford family. Early pioneers, Joseph Warren Safford, born 1775, and in Bennington, Vermont, his wife Diantha Nee Boardman, and sons Joseph Bruster, Anson, Pearson Killen, also known as APK, and Alfred Bruster, and two daughters, Anne Summit and Mary Jane, came from Hyde Park, Vermont, to a settlement of Woods Corners, known as Crete, in 1837. Joseph Safford was a farmer. Joseph Jr. purchased land south of Exchange Street, about a 3/4 mile east of Crete's Main Street. APK purchased land across the street from Joseph, and this became the Safford Farm. Today, the property is the Treewood Farm. The Safford children were well educated and quite a legend behind them. Born here, buried here in this cemetery are the parents, two children, Joseph Jr. and Anne Summit Safford, also are buried at the cemetery. The oldest daughter, Anne Summit, born 1816, married George C. Gridley in Will County, Illinois, April 4th, 1839. She died in 1848 and is buried on the east side of the cemetery near the Marketplace building. Son Joseph Jr., born in 1817, was a farmer and is buried here by his parents. His wife, Letty, remarried after he died. Also buried here is one of his daughters, Delilah, who was educated in Carroll, Illinois, and in 1868 taught at Beebe's Grove School in Crete. APK, Anson Peasley Killen, born in 1818, was captain of 13 men of the Crete Company that left Crete in 1850 for California in the gold rush. While in California, he served 2 terms in the state legislature. In 1867, President Grant appointed him governor of Arizona Territory, which he served 2 terms. He was founder of the Arizona public school system, the town of Safford, Arizona, and was named after him. In 1880, he left Arizona and east to Florida, where he founded Tarpon Springs. A.P. Albert Bruster, born 1822, at age 18, studied law but never became a lawyer. While in Joliet, he became the confidential clerk of the then Illinois Governor Madison in his business affairs. He later moved to Shawneetown, Illinois, and there began the State Bank of Illinois and established the first public school of Shawneetown. His younger sister, Mary Jane, became the first school teacher. Mary Jane Safford, the youngest child, was born in 1834, was schooled in Crete, possibly by Willard Wood, Crete's first schoolmaster, and at Carroll, Illinois. When her parents died in 1848 and 49, her family sent her to be educated at the academy in Bakersfield, Vermont. She traveled to Canada to learn French and was governess of a German-speaking family, being skilled in German. She returned to Illinois, went to live with her brother Alfred in Carroll, Illinois. Here Mary Jane and another lady, Mother Bickerdike, became battlefield nurses during the Civil War, nursing wounded soldiers. The soldiers referred to Mary Jane as the Angel of Carroll, Illinois. Her interest in nursing led her to the New York Medical School for women, graduating in 1880. Studied surgery in Vienna, Austria, and continued her studies in Rogau, Germany, where she performed the first ovarian ostomy ever done on by a woman. Returning to America, she became a professor of women's diseases at Boston University School of Medicine and a staff physician at the Massachusetts Homeopathic Hospital. She spent her last years with her brother APK in Tarpon Springs, Florida, and here she became the first practicing woman physician in Florida. Ties to the Underground Railroad. The Safford family were abolitionists, and their farm on Exchange Street was an Underground Railroad station. This has been documented in an early Boston periodical. From the Boston periodical, the Cottage Heath, published in May 1876, I'll read the personal account of the daughter Mary Jane and her memory of Safford's Underground Station as written in the magazine. Mary Jane was born in 1884 and is probably 34, and is possibly 6 years old at the time. They belonged to a class known as abolitionists, and some of the most striking recollections of Mary's childhood were connected with the Underground Railroad, of which her father's farm formed a station. Many times she had been awakened from sleep by a low tapping on the door, in which to answer, her mother would rise and admit they're fugitives, giving them food, and if not closely pursued, afford them rest and shelter. They always went away with well-packed knapsacks and explicit directions of the next station. On one such occasion, an old man, his wife, and little child came to their door for shelter. They were so much exhausted by fatigue and suffering that it was decided they stay 2 or 3 days, and a hiding place was made for them in the cellar. Soon after their arrival, some men, impelled perhaps by the general principle that the abolitionist house with their examination, came to search for them. The only entrance to the cellar through the house was by trap door. On this door, little Mary Jane Safford placed herself, and in various childish devices managed to direct the attention of the pursuers, so that after a hasty search of the house, they left without having noticed the door. The mother then spoke to the child in regard to how unusual conduct in their presence, and asked the reason why. Why, mother, I was afraid you were going to see the trap door, so I did not do so, was the earnest reply. That's the story of the Safford family today, and also part of the story of the Underground Railroad, which went through Crete. Many years ago, my father was plowing on broken ground on the farm, and land that had not been plowed before. While turning over the plow with the ground with the plow, they found that what most likely was the early broken foundation of the building. This has most likely been the site of the Safford homestead. This site was near timber for building and firewood, and near a creek where water both needed to survive. It's not until 2010 that the article just read from the Boston magazine, printed in 1876, found its way to our family. This document, a fourth railroad, underground railroad station in Crete Township. Those documents earlier were Cushing Farm, the Cook Farm, and the BB Beach Farm, all on Richton Road.
Okay, thank you, Waylon. So, all these things that turn up as time goes on should be an indication to us. Don't throw any of those old historical documents away. So, with that in mind, I'd like to just read a list of the soldiers that are buried here in this cemetery. William Hughes from the Revolutionary War, Sam Hughes from the War of 1812, Henry Hughes, Civil War, A.D. Hughes, Spanish War. That's 4 Hugheses. That's quite a few. John Elwell, David Peet, Charles Dasher, John W. Cole, George Wilder, Willis Cook, Myron Cook, David Pearson, William Robinson, Ira Chapman, Lyman Farnham, Ed Richards, George Cox, William F. Brown, Robert Brown, Edward Noble, Henry D. Jarnett, who's a Confederate veteran. I believe that's the, maybe there's a couple more. Oh yeah, well, okay, just a few more. Fred Bendel, Spanish-American War, Ansel Gammon, Civil War, Charles Williamson, Spanish War, Frank Graham, Donald Helm, and Larry Epley from World War II. I'm sorry, Frank Graham was World War I. So there's veterans of all wars, recent wars, except for Vietnam and the current wars that we're involved in. So, anyhow, I'm going to turn this back over to Phyllis. She might have a few words of wisdom for you. Here you go, Diantha.
I think it's too cold to have a few words, so I just want to, on behalf of the Crete Historical Society, thank you all for sticking it out and hearing a little bit of the history, and so we're so glad you could come today. Thank you very much.
No, thank you.
Oh, he reminded me. We have a few more events coming up. I am going to present the information on the Sears homes in Crete again on Wednesday, October 3rd at the Crete Library. That's at 7 o'clock in the evening. We're hoping to do a few more things, especially in perhaps in February, about the Underground Railroad too. So thank you again. Anything else, Tim?
Nope. Thanks for everybody to come out here. I think one or two other topics we might deal with is the history of the railroads in Crete. There used to be a railroad running right down Vincennes Street. It was a streetcar line that went from Blue Island to Kankakee or Bradley.
Chicago to Kankakee.
Yeah, Chicago to Kankakee. The CNEI Railroad that just goes through town just to the east of us here. That used to be called the Chicago, Danville, and Vincennes Railroad. I believe it came to Crete in 1869. And then east of town, we mentioned before, was the Milwaukee Railroad, was Chicago, St. Paul, and Vincennes Railroad. So we've got a couple local experts on some of those topics, so we hope to have programs for those as well. So sign up on the Historical Society membership and we'll keep you posted. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.